Welcome to the OnThePen, the Weekly Dose podcast, your one-stop shop for obesity medicine news with your host, ManOnMounjaro, Dave Knapp. Welcome to OnThePen, the Weekly Dose podcast for this Tuesday, November 12th, 2024. Welcome. If this is your first time here, I'm Dave Knapp, ManOnMounjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen. That's why you're here. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Mounjaro, Zepbound, that pen. That's what we talk about here at OnThePen. All the news facing obesity medicines, whether it's past treatments, current treatments, or future treatments, that's what we cover here. And we put it all in the context of the information that matters most to you, the patient. See, it seems like most of the information that's out there for this type of medication or for these treatments is intended for the medical community, or it's intended for the financial investor community. And we try to take that flow of information and turn it into something that means something to you as a patient. And if you find that valuable, if you find what we're doing valuable here at OnThePen, a 5-star rating review on the podcast does wonders to help this reach new people. And if you're on YouTube, the subscribe and the thumbs up button help as well. But we're going to get into it this week because there's some really interesting news in the world of this Catalent merger with Novo Nordisk. This has major implications to the future supply of GLP-1 medications. Now, Catalent, just a quick flyover, is a manufacturer of basically just generic medications, right? But they have contracts with both Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, and scores of other pharmaceutical companies. And essentially, you've seen two different strategies play out between Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk. Eli Lilly is raising up $20-some billion worth of factories, both in the United States and abroad, to increase their capacity to manufacture Mounjaro, Zepbound, and the future treatments for obesity medicine, where Novo Nordisk has had a much smaller investment in expanding their manufacturing capacity, building from the ground up, instead looking to acquire Catalent in 3 main facilities to manufacture not only Wegovy and Ozempic, but the future weight loss blockbuster that is about to hit the market in 2026 called CagriSema. Now, the flag has been thrown on the field by not just Eli Lilly, but other pharmaceutical companies. And now regulators in both the EU and the United States are both taking a real close look at this. Now, this is a deal that Novo Nordisk was hopeful would be done by the end of the year, but it is looking more and more like this deal might not go through. Now, one of the interesting things that hit the news this week was basically that Catalent has been saying all along that they will fulfill the contracts that they have with the likes of Eli Lilly. Eli Lilly has basically said that they're leveraging the capacity at Catalent to help manufacture the supply of Zepbound and Mounjaro. Now, Catalent sort of came out this past week and basically said, no, we're not. We don't have contracts for those medications. And so if you're reading between the lines, it sounds more and more like Catalent is actually probably making the diabetes and obesity treatments for the future, like retatrutide, and potentially orforglipron for their clinical trials. Now, what does that do to Eli Lilly if this deal goes through and for some reason Catalent wouldn't live up to the expectations that they have laid out in the contract of their ability to help them manufacture these future drugs? So you can see real quick why Eli Lilly is not too keen on their largest competitor in the market gobbling up one of their biggest vendors. And so this is a really interesting one to watch, because as this takes shape, it's going to be more and more meaningful as we get towards the end of the year, when Novo Nordisk expected this deal to go through. So the Catalent-Novo merger continues to be one of the more interesting storylines in GLP-1s. Now, moving on to an interesting piece of news that dropped today on Maritide. If you've been following along, Maritide is the GLP-1 agonist combined with the GIP antagonist delivered in a monoclonal antibody treatment from Amgen. Now, I've been rather bearish on Maritide because they've gone the complete opposite of Eli Lilly. Eli Lilly has tirzepatide, which is a GLP-1 GIP agonist. So it finds those receptors for GIP and it binds to them, much like endogenous GLP-1 does. Now with Maritide, it actually comes along and it blocks the receptors from receiving that GIP signal. And what they experienced early on in the trials was just tremendous side effects and pretty high dropout rates, even though the number of people in the trials were small. Now, it's a once monthly. So not only do you have increased levels of GI side effects and nausea, but they're with you for a month. So for that reason, I've already been bearish. But one of the things that we've casually talked about on the pen is how GIP receptors reside within the cells of your bones. So a lot of people experience, this bone pain or kind of like that achy flu feeling when they're on tirzepatide. If that's been you, let me know in the comments of this video. It's one of those like low key, people don't talk about this that much, but it's definitely something that I experienced early on. And in hindsight, I kind of realized, oh, it was probably the medication. But they're doing studies for tirzepatide in osteoarthritis because what they find is the binding to those cells may be beneficial to the bone structure and to be able to maintain that bone density, even in the face of dramatic weight loss, because dramatic weight loss ultimately can lead to basically the deterioration of your bone structure. And so being able to maintain bone density in the face of rapid weight loss is a really important thing. And it looks like there's a potential early signal in this trial that was leaked today that Amgen's Maritide is actually showing pretty negative numbers when it comes to the loss of bone density in their treatment just after 1 month. Some pretty staggering numbers. So we'll have to keep our eye on that. I'll link this article in the description in the show notes. You can always follow along with these articles because we list them all out in the show notes for you. Now, moving on to semaglutide. Now, we have continued to see this onslaught against compounded versions of GLP-1 medications. I won't rehash everything, but suffice it to say that November 21st is a really big date in the community for compound tirzepatide. That's when both the FDA and the Outsourcing Facilities Association have to report back to the court. We could potentially hear at that time that the FDA has either elected to leave tirzepatide off of the shortage list or put it back on the shortage list. And sort of the future of mass compounding of tirzepatide hangs in the balance there, depending on what happens there. Of course, if the FDA comes back and says we stand by our decision to remove it from the master shortage list, then December 2nd is sort of that magic date where 503B pharmacies won't be allowed to mass compound this anymore. And you'll be relying on custom formulations or doses that are not commercially available being prescribed and then put together by 503A pharmacies. Much harder for them to manufacture and scale than it is for 503B pharmacies. And so that's where this whole saga with tirzepatide is. But in the meantime, what you've seen is Novo Nordisk move to remove semaglutide from the shortage list, reporting that all their doses of both Ozempic and Wegovy are commercially available. Now, this is despite something that they had indicated previously in their earnings call, basically saying that they were going to roll their starter dose of Wegovy in shortage through the end of the year. Now, I'm going to play a little bit of speculation here because I think sort of what's happening here is around the time that Eli Lilly decided to remove tirzepatide from the shortage list, you saw them sit on a whole bunch of supply during the third quarter. You saw their third quarter earnings take a hit because they missed expectation on sales for tirzepatide while basically saying that they were sitting on supply. Well, they had to show supply in bulk. Basically, they had to show that they could put it on the shelves, right? And so that is my speculation as to why they didn't hit their sales targets, is because I think they were trying to show the FDA as best as they could balance everything that, hey, we do have supply. We can meet demand. Let's go ahead and remove that now from the shortage list. Novo, who had told us at the time that they were going to leave semaglutide on the shortage list, sort of reversed their position and removed it all from the shortage list about a week or 10 days ago. This came as sort of a stunning move to those of us who follow this stuff closely because it ran counter to what they said. Now, here's my speculation on what's going on. Obviously, there was a big election on November 4th. Donald Trump is the president-elect, and one of the things that he has been saying is that he was going to put Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In a pretty high position of power when it comes to overseeing the health in this country. It's presumably or potentially the Director of Health and Human Services. This would oversee the FDA. And you see Mr. Kennedy is quite antagonistic of the FDA and of Big Pharma. Now, there's a lot of opinions floating around and tensions are high, and it's sort of hard to cut through this topic without being political, but that's just what I'm going to do. We report the straight facts here, and I want to tell you why I'm actually bullish on the future of compounds with the new administration coming in. I believe that all this move was because Novo and Lilly did not want to have this fight with a potential FDA that was under the control of somebody like RFK Jr., who is rather antagonistic towards pharmaceutical companies. In other words, I don't think it's going to be very high on his priority list to protect their patents vis-a-vis playing sort of funny business with the FDA shortage list. Now, one of the things that we did this past week at OnThePen is we engaged in a policy platform that Mr. Kennedy put out, which allows people to sort of advocate for policy changes within the federal government. Now, just please understand the distinction. This isn't about new laws, right? That's not what the FDA does. They don't create law. They create policy around law. And so the law is obviously made at a congressional level, signed into law by the president. But at the policy regulation level, what we did was we put together basically a petition or a request that you can check. We'll link that in the show notes as well. Just basically for more transparency in the drug shortage process. Now, you may say, why don't we just ask for them to just allow compounds? Well, that's a separate thing altogether because that would require change of law. This is simply what the policy is there and what we would like to see enacted. And we want more transparency in that process. We want to know more about what's going on and what's being reported to the FDA. We want that to be public information, and we want to see that these drug companies actually do have a buffer supply of stock that they can supply for a 6-month period. So if you'd like to check that out, and you can just go, like, if you think things need to be added to that, you can go comment on that. But it's just a form of advocacy that we can do, again, with the incoming administration seemingly having an open ear. I think that we ought to make our voices heard in that policy, because that policy was never designed to deal with this. And we as patients should demand transparency in this process. So I am bullish for a couple of reasons. I've done a couple videos on this in the last week or so. You've seen RFK Jr. be very pro-peptide and very anti-big pharma. I think that creates a perfect storm to be an environment that could potentially be a little bit more, let's say, friendly to compounds than in the future. But I'm open to what your thoughts are. Again, I'm just trying to interpret this within the purview of everything that I study and learn about all of this stuff. It's not intended to be a political statement or a political endorsement by any means. It's simply dealing with the reality. And I'm bullish on accessibility in 2025 with somebody like RFK Jr. at the helm as it relates to GLP-1s and nothing else. Right. So we'll see. I'd like to hear from you, because I know there are a lot of opinions, thoughts, and comments that you guys have to make on this, and I'm dying to hear what they are. I think this is great conversation to have. But if you would like to be part of that petition for more transparency in that process of the FDA drug shortage reporting, you can go to that link that's in the description of the video on YouTube or in the show notes of the podcast. And please hit the vote button. You can vote for it, and that upvotes it. It lets more people see it and potentially gets it on the radar of the people that may be making some policy decisions in the future. So if you feel so inclined, share it somewhere else as well. But understand the distinction that this is not a fix-all for compounds. It's just simply a request for them to look at that policy again, which I think is woefully inadequate at addressing the issue of compounded GLP-1 medications. But the story here continues, because this assault that you've seen by Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk to remove compounds, again, we just laid the groundwork for why I think it's happened when it's happened. I think it very much has to do with the incoming administration. They were making calculations that if there's an incoming administration, this is a fight we want to have on this side of that administration, not once the administration is in power. Again, open to what your thoughts and comments are, but that is my analysis on it, given everything that I know about this particular topic. And we've been covering it very, very closely here at OnThePen. But one of their most recent moves was to basically, in their last earnings call, Novo Nordisk came out and they said that there has been, I think it was like 10 deaths associated with compounded medications and over 100 hospitalizations. So this is all designed to strike fear into versions of semaglutide that are not branded, right? And I think while it is tragic that there are potentially some lives that have been impacted by compounded medications in a negative way, it's important to understand that we don't have the whole context here. And there's a whole database set up at the FDA's website, and I'll link this in the show notes as well. It's called the FAERS system. It's the FDA's Adverse Event Reporting System, where basically doctors can go and they can basically report on whether patients have had adverse reactions to branded medication. So you can go up there and you can look up Wegovy, you can look up Ozempic. And we've got an article up at onthepen.com if you want to get into the nitty gritty and the details and sort of look at the chart that I posted there directly from the FDA's website. But the reality is, in the 6+ years since Ozempic and Wegovy have hit the market, the FAERS database has recorded 379 deaths associated with the branded versions of these drugs. Now, it's important to note that this does not mean that the drug was the cause of death, right? This isn't 379 people that they look at and they go, they were on semaglutide and it killed them. That is definitely not what the FAERS database. But when the doctor finds it notable that a patient had an issue with the medication and finds the fact that they were on that medication notable in their cause of death, they do flag it in the FAERS database for further investigation. So if Novo Nordisk were being honest here, it's not just the compounds that have had hospitalizations associated with the use of semaglutide. It's not just compounds that have had deaths that have been loosely associated with semaglutide. It's the branded stuff too. So if we're going to talk in those terms, I think it's important for Novo Nordisk to talk about the risks overall of semaglutide and not just compound. It's simply disingenuous. So if you're out there and you're trying to make your case against compounds, I think you really do a disservice by offering up information that is at best extremely disingenuous, and I think really designed to mislead. Because again, Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly both have a vested interest in shutting down compounds. And as we just laid the groundwork for this whole thing, they have picked this fight against compounds over the last couple of months. And this is the biggest topic in accessibility to GLP-1s. We have an estimated 2 million people on compounded medications. There are an estimated 15 million people in the United States on GLP-1s, an additional 2 million. That's a significant percentage of people who are on GLP-1s that are on the compounded versions. And if we're talking about getting rid of them altogether, then we're talking about a significant issue of people who are receiving treatment who will no longer have access to treatment. And that is a topic worth discussing and worth following extremely closely. That is why so much of our time at OnThePen, both the website, both the podcast, and the show, have been devoted to covering this, because it is a huge deal for people who are on these medications. The fact that these 2 million people relying on compounds could potentially be losing access because of insurance not being able to afford it because of scarcity, not being able to find it, even though they're reported as commercially available. All these things come together to create a tremendous amount of panic, a tremendous amount of anxiety around how they're going to continue to get treatment for their chronic disease. And so we'll continue to follow this as closely as possible. The key next date is November 21st. And again, if tirzepatide is left removed and off of the shortage list at that time, December 2nd, is when things are going to change in a really big way. Semaglutide remains to be seen as to whether they take that off the master shortage list. All doses of Wegovy and Ozempic currently reported as not in shortage, commercially available. If they remove that from the master shortage list, then semaglutide could be close to follow. So we'll be following this extremely closely at OnThePen. That's why it is incredibly important that you both share this podcast, sign up for email alerts at onthepen.com, and then make sure that you are giving the podcast a 5-star rating review so that the 2 million people that this impacts, are hearing this information so that they can have more competent and confident conversations with their medical care team. Now, it's never been more important for you to consider the fact that branded medications may be the way forward if these companies win the battle against compounds. And because of the sheer might and power of two of the largest, not just largest pharmaceutical companies, but two of the largest companies in the world in Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, it's just likely that they're not going to go down without a tremendous fight, and likely going to at least greatly limit the accessibility to compounded medications. That would be what my money would be on, even though that's not who I want to prevail in this case necessarily. We want access to safe compounded medications in the face of shortages, right? And we just need and desire and demand transparency in that process. So check out the policy petition that we have over on the website. Just there's going to be a lot of stuff in the description in the show notes. If you don't usually visit the description in the show notes, you're going to want to, but it's never been more important to know where you stand from an insurance standpoint. And it's never been more important to have really great telehealth providers or doctors that know how to navigate the insurance process, know how to do prior authorizations, and know how to do formulary exclusions, right? Because if it's not on your formulary, there are some ways around that, especially with all the data that's dropped on the comorbidities with tirzepatide lately, the osteoarthritis information forthcoming, the sleep apnea study, and the heart failure study. All of those things can be put together to make a case to your insurance company that is the best treatment for you, and your doctor can help do that. Now, oftentimes primary care doctors do not have the resources or the time or even the know-how to effectively fight for prior authorizations and formulary exclusions. Oftentimes PCPs just do not have those resources, and so it's too much for them. That's where it's important to get in touch with a really good telehealth company. I work with Ro. They are a sponsor of the podcast. Check out ro.co/OTP. They are really, really good at fighting these battles for you. They do it thousands of times a month, and so they know all the tips and tricks, much more so than your average primary care doctor. So check out ro.co/OTP for more information about their Ro Body program, where patients lose 15 to 20% of their body weight in a year when coupling GLP-1 treatments with lifestyle modifications. Of course, if you're going to try any new medication, it's extremely important that you be aware of the potential side effects. All of that is available within a couple clicks at ro.co/OTP. Learn more about it all there, and see if they might be able to find you access to branded medication. You have the ability through Ro and their insurance checker tool, ro.co/checker, to just upload your insurance information, and they'll spit back a report to your email pretty quickly on what medications are covered and what your options are. So please, they've got great tools. And of course, as always, report the shortage is a great way to do that too at ro.co/supply-checker to supply tracker. Sorry. If you just Google GLP-1 supply tracker, you'll be able to find that, and you can report the shortage. They'll report that on to the FDA too. And so the FDA can hear our side of the story as boots on the ground. What's it like to actually hunt around for these medications that are apparently not in shortage? So that was a mouthful this week. Thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you for being the best part of what we do at On The Pen. This week, we have a great live show planned for you. We're still waiting for the third part of our 3-part series on the shortages to come together. I am not going to leave you hanging on that. Just know something very big is in the works. So that won't be this week. Hopefully within the next couple of weeks, though, I'll keep you posted on that. But thanks again for hanging out with me. Thanks for being the best part of what we do here at On The Pen. Don't forget to leave the podcast a 5-star rating and review, and we will catch you on the next one. Thank y'all. Appreciate you.